We are
Excellent. Well, I want to welcome everyone to the 2020 STS program, Taking on OER, Barriers and Limitations to OER Implementation in STEM. We are really excited to be here. We've all heard a lot lately about the benefits of open education resources, or OERs, including lower textbook costs and offering alternatives to textbooks provided by traditional publishers. But those problems haven't disappeared, yet OER use is still pretty limited. So we wanted to hear from some people who have faced and overcome some of the barriers to implementing OER. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to please keep your camera and microphone off during the presentations so that we can keep our focus on our speakers, and also to please hold questions or type them in the chat for the Q&A at the end of the program. We were blown away by the response to this program, and we want to make sure you know that a recording will be sent out to everyone who registered for the program, or a link rather to the recording will be sent out later to everyone who registered. I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today. Dr. Andrea McGinley is a clinical assistant professor of biology at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where she teaches courses in developmental biology and microbiology. She's interested in creating meaningful, engaging learning experiences for students and leveraging OER to increase equity in higher ed. And she'll be sharing her experience with implementing OER in her classroom in order to help us better understand how barriers to OER can be overcome. Our other speakers today are Chris Diaz and Dr. Aaron Kuiper, both of Northwestern University, and they'll be sharing their experience with OER adoption, successes, and limitations as well. Chris Diaz is the digital publishing librarian at Northwestern University, where he provides open access publishing services on behalf of the university libraries. And his previous work on supporting OER and course materials includes an article in the Code for Lib journal and 2 edited volumes for the ALCTS monograph series called Affordable Course Materials and Textbooks in Academic Libraries. Aaron Kuiper is an assistant professor of instruction in statistics and the director of the minor in data science at Northwestern University. His primary work and research is dedicated to developing and implementing methods, techniques, and strategies for teaching statistics, and especially for introductory statistics and data science related courses. His other research interests include statistical disclosure controls for educational data and the design and implementation of randomized experiments in education. He's also the recipient of a Northwestern OER grant for the 2019-2020 academic year, and we'll hear a little bit more about that as well. Our hope is that by the end of this program, you'll be able to recognize obstacles to implementing OER in STEM and describe the benefits and limitations of OER at your home institution, and ultimately identify practices and courses of action to implement OER where you are. Dr. McGinley, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us. Take it away.
Thank you, Miranda, for that introduction. Okay, so I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about my experience implementing an OER lab manual in my microbiology course at the University of Illinois at Chicago. The course that I was working with is called Microbiology Lab, or BIOS 351. It is an upper level elective course that is popular with our biological science majors. It's also taken by pre-health students that are going into nursing, dentistry, medical school. It's mostly taken by juniors and seniors, and we have anywhere from 200 to 250 students enrolled in the course each semester. Some of the outcomes for the course is we really want students to have a hands-on learning experience where they become proficient in operating a microscope. They learn how to perform aseptic technique, meaning They can work with microorganisms and cultures without contaminating themselves or their working environment. They know how to prepare pure cultures, stain, look at microbes under the microscope, etc. We also have some project-based learning in the course where they learn to identify an unknown organism that's assigned to them. And they also are expected to apply the techniques they're learning to medical microbiology, which is really important for our pre-health students. The process that I went through of implementing this OER lab manual was in fall of 2017. I applied for an institutional grant that UIC was offering to encourage faculty to learn about OER and start incorporating them into the classroom. This was actually the first time that I had ever heard of open education resources, was when this program started being advertised. It's called the Open Textbook Faculty Incentive Program. It's co-sponsored by our provost and the university library offices, and they've been making a $20,000 total sum available to faculty that apply for the program on an annual basis. So I applied for that program. I was accepted in spring of 2018, and I was awarded a stipend, which I was happy to be able to use for some of my research in the lab in order to invest time into preparing this OER manual. I spent spring of 2018 researching the different manuals that were available, and I chose 3 different sources, and some of the original content I had created for the course, adapted and combined them into creating a lab manual for the students. The lab manual was published as a PDF that was available as individual chapters on Blackboard, which is our learning management system. In the summer, I did a little pilot test of the OER manual with the small group of enrollees we have over the summer. And then in fall of 2018, we went live with our big group of students. For me, the biggest impact that I've seen from adopting this manual is the amount of money that we have saved students taking this course. Before we developed the OER, the traditional print manual that I was using was a customed kind of pared down edition of Benson's Microbiological Applications. It cost students about $60 new in the bookstore, or they could find it used online for about $20. We had estimated that about half of our students were purchasing it new and half were purchasing used editions. Since we implemented the OER lab manual, we've had about 950 students, 57 students enrolled in this course, and we've saved them about $38,000, which is huge and I'm very pleased with. I pulled out some of the student comments that they had relevant to the lab manual from that first fall semester where we implemented the OER manual. They had a lot to say about the lab manual, but mostly they focused on appreciating that the manual was free, that it was accessible to them, that it was one less thing they had to worry about obtaining. They liked being able to access it through our learning management system because they felt that the chapters were neatly organized, and I was able to pair the chapters with the content, the rest of the material we were going through in that week. And they felt that it alleviated a financial burden on them. Some of the benefits that I've seen of implementing an OER that are specific to the lab setting is that I was able to customize the text of the lab manual to the specific protocols and the equipment that I have in the laboratory. The old lab manual, we would often have to give verbal instructions to students, modifying what was written in the printed text because it wasn't easy for us to change it. So we would have to say, the lab manual says you're going to use E. coli, but instead we're going to use Serratia for this experiment. We would have to constantly be giving updates that would explain where we were deviating from the printed manual. That was no longer an issue once I could customize the manual to exactly what we were doing in the lab. I was also able to add instructions in for the size of the group and how they were sharing materials. So one group of students is going to share this one Petri plate, or this is shared between two groups of students. As we did experiments multiple times over the semesters and we found things that worked better or things that weren't working, I was able to tweak the lab manual as those experiments were evolving. And it was very easy for me to add new experiments and remove experiments as we continued updating and improving the course. The obstacles that I encountered to implementing OER in a lab setting were, first of all, awareness. Before I heard about this incentive program for faculty, I just wasn't aware that OER was available. I knew about OpenStax, and I knew that there were some major textbooks available for introductory level courses, but I didn't think that there were going to be materials available for a higher level lab course, or that there would be materials relevant for me and my students. The next obstacle I encountered was just locating resources. There are a lot of databases, and our university library actually made available a lot of resources to help connect me to where these OER resources are housed online. But there's no central, singular place where you can find everything. So there was definitely a time investment for finding different manuals and then reviewing them, trying to figure out what would work. The editing workload was significant. The manual that I ended up choosing was published online in a PDF format. So I had to transport that text into a Word document and do a lot of editing tweaks for the weird formatting stuff that happened. That took a significant amount of time to get it into a more easily editable format. I found that, unfortunately, in some of the OER manuals that I have reviewed online, they oftentimes have lower quality graphics and diagrams than what are available in published or print manuals. So it's not as visually appealing to the students. This wasn't as relevant a factor to me, but I know some of my colleagues rely on published manuals and more traditional print sources because they are integrated with assessments and supplementary material packages that make it kind of really easy to implement that curriculum into your classroom. So the lack of, quiz questions or test banks, for example, could be an obstacle for some faculty members. Some more traditional text resources are also well integrated with the learning management system. So for example, you could send students to the online version of the textbook, have them take a quiz, and then those grades be automatically uploaded into your learning management system. That wasn't an option with OER. And the issue that I am now facing in this era of COVID is I'm finding that there are few OER resources available for completing virtual or online lab exercises. So despite all these obstacles, I was still very pleased, and I feel like it's benefited the students to have this resource available in the classroom. And I look forward to chatting with you guys about that more.
Thank you so much, Dr. McGinley. Remember, everyone, you can put questions in the chat, and Dr. McGinley is going to address those at the end during our Q&A. So if you think of anything you'd like to know further, make sure you make a note of that. Without further ado, Chris Diaz and Dr. Aaron Kuiper of Northwestern University. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Hi, everyone. So Aaron and I have a presentation where we're going to be talking about OER for statistics and data science. I will be discussing my work as a librarian promoting OER and supporting OER creators, highlighting a few limitations and barriers along the way. And Aaron will be discussing authoring, editing, and teaching with OER. We have a link to our slides, which you can see down below, and follow along if you'd like, because we have links to some other resources that I'll be pointing out. So we started promoting OER in the library in 2017, around the same time that there was a big push to increase the socioeconomic diversity of students at Northwestern. The president had a program that would, we try to get 20% of our incoming class to be Pell eligible by the year 2020, which we met this goal the following year. And, you know, having students coming to Northwestern and expecting them to pay around $1,600 a year for books and supplies, we wanted to have a more concerted, formal effort around supporting the students while they're here. And so we had some informal discussions between the libraries, the IT department, specifically the people who manage our Canvas instance, our learning management system, and the provost's office about textbook costs. And one of the key things that really helped get our affordability initiative off the ground is creating a university-wide committee called Affordable Instructional Resources, AIR for short, which looked at course costs somewhat holistically. Our focus areas were around getting timely textbook orders, which means getting textbook information into the course registration system at the time that students register, so they have more time to shop around. Increasing our use of library course reserves so that we can minimize the duplicative costs that students will pay when they buy a course pack for stuff that they already get through our library e-resources. And then the third focus area, which is where I focus on, is open educational resources. The committee involves people from Provost's office, several librarians, and our learning technologies manager who manages Canvas. And we're sponsored by the Provost's office and the university libraries, which is kind of like who we report to. One of the first outreach pieces that we did was an OER bibliography service. And this is essentially a way for faculty to send us a syllabus to a shared email account, and a librarian will respond by doing a search for OER on each course topic. This is also a way to get a sense of like what people are teaching with. So if they were teaching with textbooks, we'd also look and see if we can get a multi-user ebook license for that book. In some cases we could. But essentially we'd respond with a list of OER that we think might be relevant for them to look at. One of the limitations to this process is that in some cases we weren't finding a lot of relevant OER, and we'd be kind of like shrugging our shoulders saying, I'm sorry, we're not really getting a whole lot that seems obvious for us to recommend to you. In other cases, we'll get a lot of different resources. And so we found that it wasn't enough for faculty to have a list of things to consider for their course, that it would take a tremendous amount of time and effort to reconcile all of these disparate reading sources, which might have different audiences in mind. And so we wanted to further incentivize the use through an OER Development Grant, which we've been doing for the past 2 years. These grants are ways to recognize the time and effort it takes to redesign a course with using OER. We started the grant program having 2 options. One was a $5,000 grant to create and publish OER, and a lower level would be $2,500 to replace a commercial textbook with OER. We decided to remove the lower level option for the current iteration of the grant program, because we wanted to be in keeping with the spirit of open education. So we wanted to make sure that we can share the results of the grant projects more broadly. But we also felt that even though some people who were doing grants at the $2,500 level, it still took enough work that we wanted to, it seemed pretty similar to the type of work that it would take to create and publish your own work. to publish a new OER. So this is funded through the Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education and through the libraries. We did 30,000 in the first year and then 20,000 in the second year. And we've had most interest from the social sciences, and one in the languages. And usually faculty will take the grant as a stipend or a contribution to a research fund, which they can then use to hire students or graduate students to help with these projects, or some combination of the two. In addition to grant funds, we also provide, me and another librarian will provide project management, copyright assistance, and publishing support throughout the duration of the grant term, which we estimate is around 12 to 18 months. And this could be everything from developing a timeline to helping write job descriptions and help find students to work as research assistants. A big area of support is understanding copyright permissions, especially when faculty want to incorporate third-party content into their OER, or they want to reuse a figure. And then just understanding and choosing Creative Commons licenses is another big area of discussion. The last section is more of my expertise in, which is creating editorial workflows, typesetting, and outputting multiple formats, usually HTML, PDF, and EPUB. So one software that we use that Aaron and I started using when we started working together is an open source tool called Bookdown, which is written in R. It's an R package, and it allows people who use R to take markdown written content and then publish HTML, PDF, and EPUB versions. One of the reasons why we like this tool is because it is optimized for more computational sciences and social sciences audiences. It can support LaTeX mathematical equations. It's open source, it can host anywhere. There's a good community around using this software. And it was something that I felt was important for me to learn how to use, because when I was talking with faculty and researchers, especially in the sciences, they're already doing a lot of their own self-publishing with their data sets and their own research materials and creating their own blogs. And so I wanted to be able to learn how to use these tools so that I can meet them at their comfort level, so that I can find areas where I can provide value, as opposed to saying, you know, give me a PDF and I'll post it on our website. That just wasn't getting a lot of interest in my early days of promoting OER. So I try to take a more hands-on approach by using these types of tools. Another tool, this is where I'd spend a lot of my time helping OER faculty creators, is using GitHub as an OER publishing platform. So we use GitHub to store our working documents. So we store our text, our image, and our data in a Git repository that's hosted in the cloud. And it's where we do a lot of our collaboration and commenting and source control of the textbook material. GitHub has two features that I use frequently and that I think are really good for OER, which is GitHub Actions and then GitHub Pages. So the way that we use these three tools is we store our textbook content in a GitHub repository. We use GitHub Actions to process and output the source material into HTML, PDF, and EPUB. And then we use GitHub Pages to host our static websites, our HTML or PDFs and EPUBs and image files, all at a public URL. And all of this is available for free as a free web service. So this is something that we like. And a lot of our researchers, especially in the sciences, are very familiar with GitHub. And so I come in and help out with the GitHub Actions part and GitHub Pages. And this is where we do a lot of our hosting of the material. And I wanted to draw attention to two areas of outreach that we've done with OER, especially in STEM. One is we produced a podcast that I have a link to that includes student interviews and faculty perspectives on using OER. I interview a faculty member in political science and another one in material science in the podcast. And then we have a video where we hosted a forum where an engineering faculty member talked about his OER authoring workflow. So now I'm going to hand it off to Aaron, who's going to talk about his role as a teacher and editor of OER. Aaron, do you have the control now?
Looks like it. Thank you, Chris. So as Chris noted, I'm going to talk about my journey with OER and the use from being a user, finding it, and then becoming a producer of OER material. Also going to do a quick overview of a few tools that we use, some insights that we have, some information, insights about some of the tools that we use, and then some feedback from students, and then what we're looking to incorporate possibly in the future as well. And then just a few quick thoughts about what we can do to get better at adopting OER. Okay, so let's see here. Make sure. Looks like the slides got out just a little bit. So for me, the OER, I started with wanting to I started teaching introductory students in statistics, and that serves somewhere between 600 to 800 students each year at Northwestern, depending on if we're running extra sections or not. So there's a lot of students. The books were running something like $80 brand new, $30, $30 to $40 free dollars used. So we thought it would be a great way to save, or at least I wanted to save students some money that way. So first thing we look, there's material out there. That's one nice thing about introductory statistics and the data science. There's a lot of free material out there, OER material out there that you can go through and shift through. And that's one of the costs mentioned earlier by Dr. McGinley, going through and editing these things, figuring out what works and what doesn't. So we spent some time going through this up. One of the requirements that I had when we were going through this was requiring that there would be a question assessment system, one that we can quiz, because with intro level statistics, I want students engaged, answering questions about reading and quizzes almost for every class. And so I needed a system that would automatically grade these things. And unfortunately, Canvas, which is our learning management system, is not that great for math questions or statistics questions. So what I was able to come across was Open Intro Statistics, which is a free online book, but has a very large contingency of users and producers of content for this book. So I was starting to adopt this book and looking at moving the questions and assessments for this book online. And it turns out that the community had already done this. My Open Math is a free website host. It's FERPA compliant within California. You can build your own instance. You can build your own instance of this system yourself if you want to have it self-contained, which is really nice because Northwestern has an extra added FERPA compliance. So we had to build our own instance so that we could control all of our students' data for answering questions and exams. So this is these two free softwares together were a great alternative. And I used this for about a year with my intro stats class, actually about 2 years. And then we started going, okay, we need to introduce some more data science skills. So we started looking for another book, and they've updated Open Intro Statistics to have some of these things, but we found another book called Modern Dive. And Modern Dive used a publishing technique that Chris had just described, using GitHub Pages, deployment this way. And they made all their work, publishing their work open to the public. We could copy it, edit it. They licensed it to be a public domain so that we could edit it however we saw fit, just as long as we share alike. And it was all through GitHub. So we decided to go that route where we could edit the book, change it, and customize it how we saw fit and work with material that way. And that's what led us to producing Introduction to Statistics and Data Science, which is heavily, you can see that it has the original authors. If you were to go to Modern Dive here, the original authors were Ismay and Kim here, but I and another colleague, Dr. Tipton, and then a graduate student actually did a lot of work with us, Katie Fitzgerald, on this. And that's the OER grant that they mentioned earlier that I received from the AIR Northwestern Committee. Actually, I was lucky enough to get a couple grants. I was able to get $10,000, $5,000 to develop this book and get it built and get the assessment built up. Questions around this. I was able to hire 2 or 3 graduate students to help write questions, help write chapters, help edit these things so we make sure that the editing was done correctly, or at least catch errors. We also incentivized undergraduate students to let us know when there's errors too. So they would email them and we'd change them right away. And that's what's really nice about the book down GitHub, the GitHub action and pages. We can deploy those changes very quickly. If there's an error in coding, which is a really big thing, we can get that out fast. And then the other grant that we received, $5,000, was to develop a course manual. I don't have it pictured here or linked, but a course manual for our data science classes, which serve, it's growing right now, serves around 300 to 400 students a year. And we're starting to roll out a manual from scratch using this paradigm of let's produce a free book that other people can build off and build the assessment material to go with it. Because that's what a lot of OER material is lacking, or at least, as Dr. McGinley pointed out, missing those assessment materials a big deal. We'd like to be able to assess students on a regular basis. So the question, I figured I'd highlight the question assessment system that we use. Integrates well in the Canvas, which is nice. It also integrates in the Blackboard and other learning management systems as well. What I'm showing you is a view of what you might see as an instructor. Now you could actually make MyOpenMath or iMath AS your actual homepage for your course. You can actually make it the homepage. I just use it as the assessment system. And so students click on a link inside Canvas and actually see this figure over here, and they work through the problems and get feedback. We currently, which has been really nice during this time, during COVID, we've been able to do all of our assessments over the system, online finals, midterms, things like this. Now, one downside, it doesn't work with like lockdown browsers right now. It's a free software, so Lockdown, Respondus, things like that might be down. But a downside of using this software, but there's trade-offs. But it's been very nice to get all of our questions up there. Now, if you're somebody looking to adopt something like this or use this assessment system for sciences, I would recommend using MyOpenMath if you can. If you don't have to worry about FERPA compliance, it's already compliant in California, which usually meets most FERPA compliance in all states. It's just at Northwestern, we had extra steps that we had to go through. So we went through and set up our own instance. So, you know, if you're going to do that, you need to have IT support, somebody that can help you get it up and running, which it only took them about a half day to get it up and running. It's well documented, easy to get going. You need to have a designated admin if you're going to be having a lot of people use it. I'm the designated admin for this. So right now, some other statistics professors actually use this system, and I add them and they start adding questions and they use this assessment question system within their class. And then just cost of server. Now, that's not really a limiting factor. You need to be having a lot of students on there before it gets to be an issue. We're serving over 1,000, and the cost is not anything that's to worry about, or at least we haven't gotten a bill from IT. They said once it gets to that, they'll let us know. And then just some info from students that I'd like to share. You know, the OER, it erases a common barrier to accessing important course materials for low-income students. And this is, I have many quotes from students about the material, some about its quality and its usage, but I have a lot of instances, and this is one of the best quotes I had about finding that it was easy to get into this, that we made it accessible, that it felt like they want to belong in there. Especially for low-income students, having to buy all the access codes, the WebAssign, all that extra money gets to, just for these little things here and there, adds up for them across all these intro classes. So they found it very nice. The textbooks are easy to keep up, which is important for all the code that we use for these classes, finding errors, updating things through the methods that we're using. And then students, I keep getting students to ask questions or looking for the link so they can use it out in the real world where they might be on a job posting, especially our data science manual where they can find examples in there. So it's all actually out there on the web. As long as they got the internet, they can collect and find this as a good future reference for their classes. And then just some future plans that we want to do to improve. I find that we need to make the material a little bit more interactive, or at least that's our next goal. Because I want the textbook to be the feature of the class and focus on these things. So annotation through perusal, hypothesis where they can read together and highlight stuff and talk about phrases and let us know what might be particularly tricky before class. Shiny apps for learning things, which are all developed through R. And then Learn R tutorials where they're embedded code. And then there's this Grade This package that allows you to take the grading of code and put it right into your learning management system. So it's all automated. Oops. And you know, we need more assessment material, and that's where most of our money and resources need to go for most of that. We need more assessment material so we can build out maybe adaptive testing, things like that, and maintaining OER material. You know, our future goal is to build out hopefully a lab of people working on these things and training them year in and year out. And just some quick thoughts about the adoption and creating OER materials. For adoption, we need to make it easier for instructors to find material. And not just making it easier where we post things up and then they might find it, maybe actively reaching out. And I think Northwestern's done a pretty good job at this. The library's done a really good job at reaching out and helping people get these things. And then also incentivize using. There's a lot of inertia about changing your course material after you have it in place. We need to find ways to incentivize people to adopt these things, whether that be a one-time bonus or something like that, or through when you're getting evaluated for tenure or annual reviews, being recognized for being for adopting these materials. We need to find some kind of incentive structure that's real and will motivate people to get past that inertia of having to spend time creating material or at least adopting new material to use. One big barrier is licensing, because if they're using older material, what they can get to license. And then the last few things here about creating material, the technical know-how is a barrier. I think the library at Northwestern is doing a great job of helping make it easier for people to go. We need to create more incentives for OER. And then I think it's very important to build a community both at the undergraduate and graduate level, so get them included as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kuiper and Chris. That was fantastic. We'll give you a minute to settle while we ramp up the Q&A. It looks like there's quite a few questions in the chat ready to go. Rachel, you're up.
And thank you to Dr. McGinley, who has already started answering some of the questions that were presented in chat. So I will be skipping those, but feel free to scroll back up in the chat if you'd like to see those answers. I'm going to start with a question that was submitted to us by someone who could not attend, and this is for all of the panelists. What unique opportunities do you think STEM has in regards to OER that have not been fully realized by the community? And how do you think these opportunities might be better leveraged or communicated?
I think STEM is already using a lot of, as Chris pointed out, a lot of the GitHub and things like that, using a lot of the tools that would make it easier to produce OER material. So I think in that regard, STEM has a one-up on a lot of areas that they're using a lot of the tools, and they can maybe, the distance from getting the technical know-how to get these things up and running is an advantage that STEM has. At least that's what I found with a lot of the stats. We use the R statistical package, and R Studio is a great actor within this film, in this community, and they put everything together and they make it easy to do these things. You still need technical know-how, but it's kind of where we're at, as Chris had mentioned earlier. This is where we're at. We're using these tools already. Let's add an extra step to make it easier to produce material and actually use OER material.
Yeah, I think that some of the gains that have been made in the past few years around the push towards open science is very valuable for greater OER adoption. One of the things that I've noticed with talking with faculty, specifically in engineering, is, you know, they're happy to share their research code and their papers and their data sets in some cases, like using tools like GitHub or Fixshare. But when I've asked about, like, you know, why not your teaching materials? Because a lot of engineers that I've spoken to in our engineering school, they write their own textbooks because things move really quickly in that field, or they just have so much specific knowledge that they want to include that they just write their own materials. But in terms of like sharing the materials that they create, there's some skittishness around it, where they feel like there's a little bit more, it's more of a personal material because it's their teaching, and it's a little bit more idiosyncratic to the way that they approach their classrooms. And I always like wonder, like, what's, you know, research, it can be also idiosyncratic and personal, and like the way that you run a lab or run your experiments. So I think that, you know, as people start to use open science as part of like science curriculum, there's an opportunity to also make science educational materials as part of that, the goals around open science.
Yeah. I'll echo what Chris said about in the science community. I think we're very pro open access in terms of publishing and research. So the mindset and the philosophy is already there. I also have noticed that there's kind of a reluctance in terms of teaching being more of a personal thing. And I've experienced that myself. Like, would this lab manual be relevant to other people? But when I view others' OER materials that they've put out there, you can kind of pick up on what is idiosyncratic to that situation, that teaching, you know, dynamic, and adapt them to your own situation pretty easily.
Thank you. And
your teaching doesn't go through a peer review system. That's one way, right? Your research sometimes go through several edits and review systems, and colleagues go through. One thing that doesn't probably happen with your teaching, which happened more. I'm a professor in instruction, so I've gotten more of that since my focus is on instruction. Work with other professors in instruction, where you actually sit down and peer review material, right? And we help each other edit and figure things out and think about the best way to present them. That's something that a lot of people teaching don't have. They don't have that support system, peer review of their work and of their teaching, at least at the higher ed.
Thanks for that. So our next question is for Dr. McGinley. What kind of hub or central repository of biomedical or life science OER would ideally meet your needs? And in what formats might you want that OER material to be available for redistribution or reuse by others? I think this is in reference to the PDF format that you had talked about as being a problematic.
I'm sorry, was that a question for me? I got distracted by a chat.
Sorry, that was for Dr. McGinley.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I was booted out of the room. Can you guys repeat the question for me, please?
Oh, no. Yes, let me pull it up again. I'm sorry. I was just asking what kind of formats or what kind of hub or central repository of biomedical life science OER would meet your needs, and what formats you would want that material to be available in for redistribution or reuse by others.
I was very impressed by Aaron's use of GitHub. I personally am very much more low tech than that. I was happy when I could find OER documents in Word document format, so that at least I wasn't copy and pasting sections from individual pages and trying to deal with pagination issues. So at bare minimum, having them in a text document or a Word document format would make it more easily editable for a low-tech person like me. In terms of a database, I think some of the databases that are already out there, like Merlot and OpenStax, are really helpful. But I've just noticed that there are resources that they're available in different places. There are some things that are posted in one repository that are not everywhere. And I don't know if there is an easy solution to that or not.
Thank you. And this next question is for Chris. Have you noticed that engineering tends to be a problematic area for locating OER materials?
I'll be honest, I don't have a sense of what are the more or less problematic areas for locating OER. My only experience with engineering is that I'm not getting a lot of questions around, can you help me find OER for engineering? It's more like I'm talking to folks and they're like, oh, I write my own material. Like, for example, our material science and engineering department has been creating their own texts for years. And they do that for all of their core curriculum. And it's written collaboratively by their faculty. And my goal has been trying to like get them comfortable putting a license on those materials and helping me get them, just make them discoverable by promoting them within the Open Education Network or promoting them in like getting them like WorldCat records and stuff. So I think more of the problematic areas in engineering that I've noticed is just the more specific to their teaching and to their work specifically, rather than looking beyond their own institution. But yeah, like I said, I haven't done a whole lot of searching, so I can't speak generally about the availability of OER in engineering.
Okay, thank you. And two platform type questions for you, Chris. And I'm gonna smush them together, but let me know if you want me to separate them. One is, if a campus has an Overleaf Pro account, do you think this could serve as an OER publishing platform? And the other platform question is, have you explored Gitbook?
Great questions. So I've worked with a few people who use Overleaf. I think Overleaf is really nice as a way to, so Overleaf is essentially like a cloud-based collaboration platform where you can write LaTeX documents. So it's heavily used in STEM courses, and people with a LaTeX training will gravitate towards Overleaf. I'm not familiar with Overleaf being able to host public documents. So I have, so one process that I've worked with is a faculty member who did all her writing in Overleaf, and then they gave me the tech files that I then transformed into, essentially, well, I transformed them into Markdown so then I can create HTML, PDF, and EPUB from those sources. So I'm not sure about using Overleaf as a publishing platform, but it is a very good collaborative writing platform. In terms of Gitbook, I know that I don't know a whole lot about Gitbook other than I know that they have like a style guide. So like when we write our book down projects, they use Gitbook styles. So it's their CSS library to make them look good. I know that the newer version of Gitbook is proprietary. So that's like a commercial product that I don't use myself. But I also haven't explored it much because, yeah.
Thank you. And I think this is an open question. One concern I've heard from faculty is that assessment components of OER may be too easy to locate by students. Have any of the presenters discovered good solutions to storing and gatekeeping of those assessment components?
So for our engineering projects, so we have a material science OER grant project, and for those projects, they create teacher editions and student editions of their textbooks from the same source, and they use LaTeX environments to kind of deploy specific versions. The way that we handle that is we use private Git repositories on GitHub so that only the faculty can see everything, and then we publish the PDF or HTML for the student version only, and then share the teacher editions like through email. But yeah, Aaron, maybe you have something some experience with, because you write a lot of assessments and questions.
Yeah. So one thing, when I start with Open Intro, they have a nice system in Open Intro to statistics. They need to verify that you're a teacher to get a hold of things. They have different levels of verification because they actually provide a lot of extra teaching material. Like you can get slides, you can get weekly homeworks, the OER, the My Open Math that goes along with it has all the questions from the book coded up, so you can put them in there. The students wouldn't be able to get access to those easily, answers to those, just like many math books, it has like the solutions to the evens in the back, so they would get that. But assessment questions, be able to get access to exam questions is a little bit more difficult. You go through a few verification steps for Open Intro. One thing that we do as we produce assessments for exams and things like that, one of my hobbies, or one of the things that I like to do research, is an item response theory, test writing, and how do you write adaptive tests. It requires banks of questions so that students answer a few questions, and then depending on their progress, what question they see next is randomly generated from a different bank of questions. That requires building a lot of questions. And that's one way I combat the exam questions, is building out a lot of questions. And I don't give out practice exams and things like that myself to try and keep those secure. So finding some of that material is actually very difficult for students. At least that's what I've found over the last few years as I've implemented this stuff.
I haven't had an issue with dealing with the assessment components of OER, because I found that, at least for my subject I was researching, they just weren't available. So the assessments that I've written to go along with the course are ones that I've prepared. And my approach to making them secure is to give lots of practice tests and to make the question banks large and to open them up and leave them open to the students. So they can't possibly memorize all the questions that are in the bank. And there's no advantage to students having copies of old exams because everyone has the same material. So that's my approach to assessment.
I'd also, to combat some of that, I also have free response in my stats classes as part of not just free response and open data projects where they're given a project and they got to work on things to where good luck. So finding a different data set each year or each quarter sometimes gets to be a little bit of work, but there's a lot of data sets out there, but making that a component where they can't just memorize questions too, where they actually have to work on a data set.
Awesome, guys. We've got about 8 minutes left. And so I just want to take an opportunity to thank you all again for coming and talking with us again today, and say thank you to everyone who stopped in to watch our program. I also want to mention that Rachel's going to put a link in the chat to a very brief evaluation of our program to help us see how we did today. So if all the people watching would mind after we're done or as we wrap up to click on that link and answer, it's seriously like 2 questions. It's very, very short. We would surely appreciate it. And again, for everyone who's here today and everyone who registered but couldn't be here, we'll be sending out a link to the recording of this program after we wrap up and once we get that published online. And thanks again to everybody. We've got about 6 more minutes for a few more questions.
Yes, we're going to squeeze in as many questions as we can while we've got you guys. So Dr. McGinley, you mentioned that there's a textbook model that integrates some more full capabilities, such as tests and quizzes, and we've been talking about that. Do you guys think that model of textbook is an inherent barrier to OER adoption in STEM, or are there ways that we could overcome that barrier? And I know Dr. Kuiper, you mentioned Open Intro. Do you think that could serve as a useful replacement for that type of textbook model?
I don't think that that's a barrier that is inherent or specific to STEM. I think it's a barrier that is associated with inertia, like the inertia that we faculty feel of, we have this system that works and it's complete and it has all of the little components and bells and whistles that we know we need to run the course. And it's difficult to switch out of that into something new once you have something that's working. Especially if, like in my case, where I was finding that the OER that was available was not, you know, a complete set of everything that I needed to build the course, where I had to add a lot of the, you know, assessment and the lecture slides and the supplemental material on my own, which is fine. It's what I'm used to doing, but it would make it certainly a lot easier if there were more complete package type OER available to instructors. It would make it easier to get over that barrier.
Yeah, I'd echo that. There's a lot of inertia because it takes a lot of time to do this well and do it right. As was mentioned by Dr. McGinley, is a lot of the figures and graphs, the visual quality, right? Even just the aesthetic of your book, because if you want students to interact and actually do it well, there's a lot of psychology and things like that back this up, that you need to make it presentable, make it easily accessible. That's one of the reasons we're trying to put more interactive things within our own books. We want to put more coding blocks directly into our book, video links right in there, so that they can do that, and just having the aesthetics. I teach data visualization, and so I'm a control freak on a lot of the aesthetic stuff, and I spend a lot of time learning about how to make the graphics better. But we need more funding to help do those things, and I'm not sure where to get those, or we need to incentivize it somehow. And lucky enough, as a professor of instruction, I'm incentivized through my review for tenure-like decisions and contract decisions, include all this stuff in there as things, as part of the evaluation process. They actually ask for us to put out in there, and I get credit for these type things. Now, for tenure line faculty, that would be important to maybe start giving more weight to those type things, especially at R1 institutions, if we want them to adopt OER material or create OER material.
So I think this is the last question. It's kind of an extension of what you were just talking about, which is, are there incentives that, I think this is particularly for the faculty members, that are more exciting or interesting, or might be more helpful in creating more widespread use of OER. So far, we've mentioned cash, money, as well as tenure and promotion requirements. Do you think one of those is better than the other in terms of trying to incentivize faculty, or are there other types of incentives that might be worthwhile to explore?
Rachel, for me, I'm also a teaching faculty, so I'm evaluated on how well I'm doing in the classroom and improvements I've made to the curriculum. So that was definitely the most salient incentive for me for developing this OER lab manual and implementing it. The cash didn't help. Being able to do some cool experiments with my undergrads in the lab was great, but knowing that the work is meaningful in terms of promotion, that was the most powerful incentive for me to invest the time into it.
Yes, I agree with you. That knowing that we're lowering the barrier to students, right? Because I can't remember how many students I was, when I was an undergraduate student teaching at, or not a graduate student at South Dakota State University, how many students wouldn't buy their intro math book, because I was teaching an introductory math book. They wouldn't buy it because they didn't have money. So they didn't have it as a resource. They couldn't afford the WebAssign to do the homework, or they'd scrape by and get it, and then they'd almost resent math for making them to buy, making them buy WebAssign. Trying to eliminate those barriers was my motivating factor. But we need to, if we want people beyond instructional faculty to do it, we need to incentivize it somehow. And the best way is to help it, reward them through probably tenure-like decisions or some kind of bonuses or some kind of recognition that is meaningful to them. I'm not 100% sure what that looks like, but something like that.
Thank you all again so much for coming today and for talking with us. I want to make sure we respect everybody's time. So we're going to wrap up and say goodbye for the day. So thank you again. We will send out the link to everyone who registered for the recording of the program. Thank you, Dr. Kuiper. Thank you, Dr. McGinley. Thank you, Chris Diaz, for joining us today.
Yeah, the licensing for the Northwestern it should be public domain. We'll get it posted. We're gonna make the GitHub all open to people as well at the end of this summer. Somebody had asked about that.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Everyone have a good day and stay safe.